Okay, friends, this is day 7, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and right here in the middle of this chapter, in the 9th verse, is one of the most controversial statements that Paul makes in 1 Corinthians. Probably the most controversial in 1 Corinthians, and something that is right at the center of a big debate in our church right now, in our denomination, in culture as a whole. And that is that Paul addresses homosexuality in this chapter. Now, here is what the goal is for today. The goal for today is to read it, to seek to understand more what Paul is saying here, and really importantly, I want to frame up for us what the questions are that our church and that society as a whole is kind of facing right now, because I think sometimes we don't frame it up correctly. Here is what today is not. Today is not a statement on where our church is on this, okay? That is something that a lot of people are eager to ask about, to talk about. That's just not what today is. This is our Bible study. We have gotten to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, and we're not going to avoid it. We're going to talk about it, but this is not a statement on behalf of our church, okay? But I do think that it is helpful to kind of frame things up a little bit. So there's a lot in chapter 6 that we're not going to deal with. That's also really important. I hope that you'll read it, maybe do some research on your own around that. But we're going to really deal with this part of it. If you haven't participated in the Bible study from yesterday, I'd encourage you to do that. We talked about just kind of sex in general, and we talked about why it is that this matters so much to Paul and why it should matter to us today. As we get going, I also want to say, and I think most of you know this, that this is a topic that involves individuals. We're talking about what Paul's talking about today. We're not just talking about the idea of homosexuality. We're talking about things that really affect individuals. And I think all of us have got to keep that in mind. This is not just kind of some vague, scholarly argument. No. This affects the real lives of real people. So let's step into this with that in mind. So what is it that Paul says? So Paul is speaking to the church in Corinth. He's writing this letter. And one of the things that he says, after he's talked about sexual morality earlier, he says, "Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God?" So the unrighteous, those who are living in ways that are not righteous, ways that are outside of the way that God intends for us to live, will not inherit the kingdom of God. So keep in mind here, when Jesus talked about the kingdom of God, he wasn't talking about the afterlife. He was talking about the very real, present reign of God today. So what does it mean that they won't inherit the kingdom of God? We're not talking here about people's afterlives. Our afterlives, our salvation, that is in Jesus' hands, and we receive salvation through faith in Jesus. So we're not talking about people's eternal destiny here. We're talking about the experience of God's kingdom, God's reign today. Don't be deceived, and there's a list of people here. Neither the sexually immoral, it's a broad statement, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. Meaning, again, like experience the fullness of what God has right now. Okay. So before we talk about the homosexuality piece, can you find yourself in this list? You may not be found in that particular bullet point, but can you find yourself in this list? The greedy, drunkards, people who get drunk, sexual immorality in any way. Can you find yourself here? So we're going to hone in on the homosexuality piece because, again, that's what everybody's kind of talking about. And again, I think that we misunderstand it a lot. But can you find yourself here? And again, it gives us a little bit more context of what Paul is going after. He desires for us to be living in righteous ways. Yesterday, where We're less and less controlled by our flesh and more consoled by the Spirit of God actively breathing into us and living through us. Okay. Homosexuality. So there's some debate around what the term actually means here. And I'm going to point you to Alex Johnston's emails that we send out. She sent out an email on Sunday that will help you with this, take you a little bit deeper. There's debate around what this actually means. Most scholars historically have believed that it means consensual male relationships. It then extends to female homosexual relationships. That's what most scholars historically, believe. There are those also that believe that what it's referring to are abusive relationships. Men either acting in sexually abusive ways towards other men, or pedophilia, or perhaps even male prostitution related with the religious practices of the pagans in the temple, that it could be related to that. So there are those who are going to say that that's what Paul is addressing here. And again, I'm going to point you to Alex's email there. So there's debate there, but what it ultimately comes down to is this question. And again, I think that we miss this. I'm going to tell you in a second two things that this debate is not about. What it ultimately comes down to is this question. It's the question of, if God has given us sexuality, it's a good gift. We know that there are ways in which it would be wrong for us to use that sexuality. There's no question that there's boundaries around that, right? The example that we saw yesterday, clearly out of bounds. Obviously, any kind of pedophilia, clearly out of bounds. The question is not, is there a line? The question is, where are those boundaries? So then when it comes to this, the question is homosexuality a good use of the sexual gifts that God has given us? That is at the heart of the issue. Let's talk about what is not really up for debate. What is not up for debate is the question of how homosexuals or anybody in the LGBTQ community should be treated. That is not up for debate. Obviously, there have been many churches and many individual Christians who have treated people very poorly. And treating people in the LGBTQ community poorly is outside of the way of Jesus. There's just no question about that. And if we're not sure about that, you can, again, look at the list. We don't treat people who get drunk that way. We don't treat people who are greedy that way. The question is not, how should we treat these folks? Or, and when I say these folks, I mean anybody in any of those categories. The question is not, how do we treat people who are drunkards or any of that. The question is that an appropriate way to live? Okay, that's the distinction. I hope that's really important. So if you struggle with that, the way that you treat people, and are we loving towards people? Well, that answer to that is, yeah, we are. We're loving towards people regardless how they use their gift of sexuality. We're kind to people. The question is that an appropriate way to use the gift of sexuality? Okay. Here's the second thing that we often miss on. The question is not whether being attracted to people of the same gender is inherently sinful or not. That's not the question. We all, our bodies, all of us, our bodies incline us towards certain things that wouldn't be good for our bodies. I mean, whether it's sexually or with food, or our bodies when we're angry tell us to do things. Again, we all know that there's a line there. I mean, here's an example of that. Most men are not wired to be monogamous. We're wired to be polygamous. Being married and being attracted to multiple women is not inherently sinful. acting on it is. Even fantasizing about it or fostering those feelings, that attraction, that is stepping outside of the boundaries. But having that is not. So this idea that someone who would be attracted to a member of the same sex is inherently sinful, that is not what Paul is saying. Again, the question is, Paul is clearly not saying that. The question is acting on that within the boundaries of the reason for which God gave us sex. So, I hope this helps to frame it up. Sex is a good gift. It's clear that there are boundaries somewhere. It's clear that there are appropriate and inappropriate uses of our gift of sexuality. The question is not, do we love people? The question is not, are people bad because of inclinations that they have? That's not it. The question is, where does homosexuality fall within the boundaries or outside of the boundaries of the purpose for which God gave us sex? That's the question. And again, not coming down on either side of this in this today, but hoping to frame it up in a way that's helpful. That is the question. It's the question that churches have been debating for a while now. And it's the question that's at the heart of the debate in the United Methodist Church right now. So if this is a personal issue for you, meaning that it is just, it's either that you are in the LGBTQ community or that for any other reason this is just a particularly personal or emotional issue for you, I hope that one of the people that you are talking with is a pastor through this, that you're allowing a pastor to care for you, speak truth to you, help you search the scriptures and all of that as a part of this. And of course, our pastors here are available to help you with that. So I know this has been a little bit longer, but again, I think it warrants it. And I hope that this has been helpful to see what is and is not going on in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Setting that aside, one of the things that we are clearly being pushed towards through Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians is this this clear call that he has for us to be more and more transformed into the image of God by the work of the Spirit in our lives. And that, at the end of the day, is something that I hope that all of us can take away from this, is, are we allowing in this particular, even with this particular question, are we allowing the Spirit of God to guide us in the way that we talk to each other, the way that we talk about each other, the way that we seek to be faithful to the way of Jesus? Is it the Spirit that's driving us? So God bless you, friends. Hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you tomorrow.